I stumbled across this book completely by accident. I was in Tucson, Arizona. I dropped by the Bookman's there. I went to the science fiction section, and I looked for some Philip K. Dick because I was in the mood to read some more Philip K. Dick. And I came across Philip K. Dick is Dead, Alas by Michael Bishop. The version that I have was published in the 1990s, but originally came out in 1987 under the title The Secret Invasion. Now, both The Secret Invasion and Philip K. Dick is Dead, Alas, both of those are perfectly Philip K. Dick style titles. And it makes sense because this book is dedicated to this book is dedicated to the heirs, both biological and literary, of Philip K. Dick. Even though I did enjoy this novel, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot less had I not been a fan of Philip K. Dick already. I've read, I want to say like 10 or 12 maybe of his novels. That's being fairly generous. Still think I would have been able to finish this book had I not enjoyed Philip K. Dick books, but I don't know if I would have ever picked it up if I didn't already quite enjoy the other authors. Overall, I enjoy it when real-life people are used in fictional scenarios. I love Dan Simmons' work, for instance. Both Philip K. Dick and Richard Nixon show up in this book. They're both real-life characters, obviously, but are used to great extents, specifically at the climax, which does go pretty nutso in a very fun way. I liked it. Visually very interesting. The book isn't super long. It is fairly dense, though. At 341 pages, it clocks in approximately 264,000 words. This is notably longer than most Philip K. Dick books, almost twice the length of some of them. This book isn't exactly science fiction, though. It's more of an alternate history urban fantasy. There are lots of science fiction elements in it, but that's more tertiary when it comes to the actual genre itself. Let's go ahead and discuss the plot and the prose. It is 1982, but it's not our 1982. King Richard Nixon presides over his fourth term. The United States won the Vietnam War, and the renowned writer Philip K. Dick has met his death when he suffers a stroke. After he resurrects, to his own surprise as much as anyone else's, he sets in motion an unlikely series of events that slowly reveals his ability to manipulate reality itself. So, first and foremost, about both the plot and the prose itself, this book is absolutely an homage to Philip K. Dick. As I mentioned earlier, it was quite literally dedicated to the heirs of Philip K. Dick. You can tell in the dialogue, you can tell from the description, you can tell from the way just each character feels. It all feels like a very accurate homage to Philip K. Dick, and a fairly well done one at that. Although the writing itself comes off very Dickian in a lot of ways, it's better, honestly. I do hate to say that a little bit because I don't want to disrespect Philip K. Dick too very much. However, I will die on the hill that his actual writing is not very good. His prose, moment to moment, is just kind of clunky and awkward to get through. Philip K. Dick is Dead, Alas, however, the Michael Bishop work, feels like it has been expanded, like it's had a little bit of time to breathe. It feels like what most Philip K. Dick books could have been, narratively speaking, in its prose, if they would have been had a little more time to breathe and to be edited and to open up and flower up a little bit. The prose itself is mostly third-person past tense, although occasionally it does jump to present tense, also still in third person, but it does jump to present tense. I really wasn't able to figure out why he went to the present tense every now and again. I'm not sure what the rule was there, why he chose to switch, but I mean, hey, whatever, it kind of gave it at least a little bit of an off-putting feeling occasionally. Switching tenses like that tends to have that feeling in most works, at least. But if that's the only reason that he chose to do that was to just impart a sense of weirdness into the story, he was able to do that in plenty of other ways. There was a lot of parts of this book that were jarring in their own ways, which it rightly should have been, right? It's modeled after Philip K. Dick's work, so it's supposed to be jarring in its own ways. But I think that doing the whole swapping back and forth between past tense and present tense was jarring in a way that didn't benefit the book. Let's go ahead and move on to the characters. I want to start by saying that there weren't any characters that I particularly disliked. Philip K. Dick, of course, is one of the characters that shows up in this book, although he shows up a lot less than I expected him to, given the fact that, the book is named after him. He is used pretty sparingly, which I appreciate, as is the other real-life character, Richard Nixon. He's also used in a pretty sparing manner. Every time Richard Nixon was on the page, though, I heard him in the Futurama Richard Nixon voice, and that made the book a lot funnier than it probably should have as well. That probably added to the experience for me. Cal Pickford is actually probably the main character of this book. We spend the most time with Cal Pickford out of everybody. Cal is just a dude that works at a pet store in Georgia. Cal is a huge Philip K. Dick fan. He has tons of books that Philip K. Dick had written but had never been officially published, as to why I won't spoil that right now. His wife, Leah, is one of the other main characters. Leah is a psychiatrist, and she's just hanging out doing her job, which is kind of floundering, when all of a sudden Philip K. Dick walks in. I enjoyed both of them fairly fine. They were both written to be just kind of your average man and woman in America. I can't really say good nor bad about them because they're just your protagonists, right? They were their standard, they were fine, we followed them, they were okay. I liked, of course, the fact that Cal was willing to hold on to, like, illicit manuscripts and stuff in this obviously dystopian version of America, which we don't know anything about now. Grace Reinhardt was a fairly large part of the story. She is an old movie star who had turned into a propagandist. She helps to Americulturate people who come to the United States and help to get them used to the culture that they're going to live in. And because, of course, this is, a bit of a dystopian state. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention it. This is definitely dystopian fiction. Don't know how I forgot to mention that, but this is definitely dystopian fiction. Grace Reinhardt is a very manipulative woman. She is, employed by the United States government to specifically spy on people, to manipulate people into working against other Americans. I don't like her, but it's one of those characters you're not supposed to like, So the last, really important character here is Le Boy Lone, I think is the name. More often referred to as Lonely Boy. I like this guy, even though he is a little bit of a shit. He doesn't come off as a very good person when you first meet him. He just kind of seems a little bit like an asshole, really kind of blinded by American propaganda. He's all gung-ho for America, but then he gets coerced. He gets manipulated into, having to spy on Cal and on Leah and a bunch of other things. I won't spoil at the moment. I can be a little sympathetic to him. I do still like him, even though he is a bit of a cock. We are now on to the spoiler section, so if you don't want spoilers, have a good day. By the end of the book, I think that this book is about how writing is important, and writing can help change not only people's minds and ideas, but quite literally the world around you. Now, granted, it's in a very metaphorical way, right? Philip K. Dick, in this book here, Philip K. Dick is dead, alas, literally uses his writing ability to change reality around him. The last couple sentences of the book makes that abundantly clear. Philip K. Dick had written us into that reality. He then is not satisfied with that new reality that we've come into, and so he puts pen to paper again and takes us, hopefully, into, he's going to create a brand new reality. So that leads you to the question of does that imply that the reality that you and I are living in, is this where Philip K. Dick stopped? If he did he intend to stop here, or did he just kind of finally run out of juice and wasn't able to take us any farther? Is this as good as he can take it before the next Philip K. Dick rises? Michael Bishop goes out of his way to show you that Philip K. Dick is like the second coming of Christ in this book, right? So is he implying that the third coming of Christ is going to have to come so that we can write our way into the next reality or some such? This is, of course, assuming that I'm reading this correctly, right? The book is a bit weird. It's not 100% clear on everything, although that's Philip K. Dick for you. It's not supposed to be 100% clear on everything. It does leave a lot of stuff ambiguous in some ways. Moving on, the climax of the book was pretty weird and out of left field, wasn't it? I'm not sure I understand why exactly Richard Nixon kind of started turning into a fucking balloon and just right? Sure, the whole Satan has possessed him and he's become one with Satan or some shit. Sure, all right, fine, fuck it, whatever. I'm happy to suspend my disbelief and roll along with it. But what? Where did you come, Mr. Michael Bishop, where did you come up with that? It's a weird, freaky idea, and I like that. Just the way that he explains him just growing larger and then ballooning across the top of the dome of the place that they're in was really interesting. And then they had to just, like, pop him, right? You know, Philip K. Dick, who had taken over the body of that one guy, right? And Cal had to pop him with the pen, right? Why? It felt a little bit weird and arbitrary, although, again, that does feel kind of Dickian anyway. That feels a bit like a Philip K. Dick novel. A lot of his books, despite having some really interesting and sometimes genuinely profound ideas, Philip K. Dick could also feel very arbitrary in his books. And the end of this book felt weird and a bit arbitrary, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it feels wrong, per se. It still feels like it fits, despite how weird and oblong-shaped it is. Specifically using the Christ imagery is, I don't know, a bit overplayed and overused and all of that, but I at least appreciate that he was upfront about it throughout the entire book. Now let's compare and contrast that to the Richard Nixon thing, where it's literally up until the last moment, like the last, I don't know, like 30 pages, 40 pages or some such, that you, like, actually have it confirmed that Richard Nixon is Satan. So, like, I think that's, I don't know, it just felt a little bit like a cop-out for me. I'm never a fan of, like, the last-minute twist, oh, it was Satan. I think that the book would have benefited if we just had known earlier on. The mass population of the U.S. didn't have to know it. It could have been a well-regarded secret that Cal could have learned in reading, you know, the Dream Impeachment of Harper Nocturne. There's quite a number of unpublished Philip K. Dick books that still circulate under weird different names in this story. Not all of them match up with actual names of Philip K. Dick books. Some of them do, some of them don't. Anyway, like, Cal could have learned about this, right? About the whole, you know, Richard Nixon is definitively Satan thing. If he would have done it earlier, I would have been fine, right? You know, like, it's just the fact that they threw that in there last minute. He should have just, you know, Bishop should have just chopped it out and left it to implication, right? Now, granted, this book came out in 1987, so I'm not exactly surprised that there was, like, satanic panic shit in there. Like, of course, there was going to be, sure, right, we're talking about Christ, so we have to bring in the other side of it. All right, whatever, fine. Throwing it on there in the last 3 seconds almost is almost as lazy as saying, like, oh, it was all the dream. It's just like, dude, bro. The reason why it irks me so much is that, like, I saw it coming, right? You know, not to be too on the nose, but there are two Dicks in this story. There's Philip K. Dick, and then there's Tricky Dick Nixon, right? The two Dicks, they're foils to each other. Obviously, if one is going to be Christ, what's the other one going to be? Like, it was almost played like a big reveal at the end, unless I just missed something, right? Maybe I'm just getting pissed over nothing. One of the things that I did like about the book that was just interesting to me, that I feel like I could relate with on a personal level, is how the manuscripts of Philip K. Dick's books were passed around. Because, you know, like, most of the books after Nixon got, like, elected into office, Philip K. Dick books stopped getting published at that point. I think, like, Valis was the only one that actually got published. Most of his books didn't traditionally come out. Most of them had to be essentially photocopies of the manuscript that was then photocopied, that was then photocopied, that was then photocopied, like, and they spread around like that. And there was this weird, awkward chain of trying to get money back to the original author. It implied that a bunch of other authors had to spread around their stories like that. And as an independent author myself, and I have to hawk a bunch of my own books, man, I know how weird and awkward it is to try and get somebody else to read your work sometimes. So that just really connected with me, right, personally. So one of the things you unavoidably have to look at are the parallels between 1982 in Philip K. Dick is Dead, Alas, and 2026 America, right? The fact that we can even, like, make those comparisons and those parallels kind of not good. The last spoilery question, I guess, to really consider here before we get to the conclusion. Does it have to be Philip K. Dick? Why did we have to do Philip K. Dick? Why couldn't we have done just another writer, right? 2 reasons. There's only 2 reasons, I think, as to why this specifically had to be Philip K. Dick. One, Michael Bishop, the author, is clearly just a fan of Philip K. Dick and has read a lot of Philip's work. 2, Philip K. Dick died, actually, in I'm pretty sure he did die in 1982. Really did die of a stroke. The narrative itself is very much specifically intertwined with the types of stories that Philip K. Dick would have written himself, right? You know, the weird reality questioning stuff, the weird science fiction stuff, the the quasi-fantasy elements in there. I do think that it would have been possible to have written this book with some other authors, but I don't think very many of them would have worked particularly. If Michael Bishop, say, would have enjoyed Kurt Vonnegut, and Kurt Vonnegut would have died in the 1980s, then I think that it's possible that this story, in general, could have been written about Kurt Vonnegut. But, he still could have gotten across the same criticisms of America. He still could have even criticized Richard Nixon in much of the same way, at least. Granted, he would have had to alter the narrative and some of the specific themes to specifically fit Vonnegut, and he definitely would have had to have altered the style, because Vonnegut has a very distinct way of writing for his own books, much, much different than Philip K. Dick. In conclusion, Philip K. Dick, He's Dead, Alas, was both a fun read and also a good send-off to one of the more influential science fiction writers of the 1900s. The rating I'm about to give it is definitely peppered by how I feel about Philip K. Dick's writing myself, how I've been personally affected by Philip K. Dick's writing. Take my rating with a grain of salt, but with that said, I think I'm going to rate it with a B-. Its general criticism of America, American politics, American culture, all of that is fairly accurate. Its portrayal of historical figures is rather absurd, but in a very enjoyable way. And its plot is nutty and unlikely, in much the same vein as the best Philip K. Dick books. Now, will I reread this book? I don't know. I'm not going to take it off the table. I'm not going to say that I won't reread this, but I don't think that I'm going to jump back into it specifically. As much as I enjoyed the experience, it was, if you'll excuse the pun, fairly novel. I see myself plumbing the depths of this book again to really ponder its eccentricities. If I really do want to get weird and freaky with the ideas, I'm probably just going to actually pick up a Philip K. Dick novel. If anything, that's what I want to do now. I just want to read a Philip K. Dick book, so. My name is Damien, by the way. I wrote The Circus, an American fantasy, Portraits in Bloodlines with Rick Foreman, and 666, a play about stones and how to carry them. All of my books are available on my website. The link is below. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.